My mom whispers to herself at night when she thinks no one is listening. Part 1.
DisastrousInvolvedI.
Disclaimer: the content presented in this video is purely fictional and intended for entertainment purposes only.
My family has an odd history of tragedy, at least, that's what my grandma always says. The only tragedy I vaguely remember myself is the death of my little sister Holly, or Hole as I would always call her when we were children. I was 10 at the time, so I don't recall much. I know I was there when it happened. My memory is simply blurry, and I don't put much stock in memories. They can be as deceitful as anything. Thinking back now, I guess it always felt like some part of me was missing growing up. My grandmother would keep on repeating her omens. Talking about past family history of accidental deaths, heartache, and the odd murder, it comes in waves, it comes when it wants to. She would ominously say, but we all knew she was superstitious and generally odd. She had always been eccentric according to my mother, who has a much strained relationship with her. After the death of Hole, they grew even further apart. Grandma kept insisting something about her death wasn't right. She would rant about an evil presence. In her worst moments, she would even go as far as throwing accusations against both me and my mother. Having eventually had enough, my mother cut all ties with her. It was the only way she could start grieving properly, she said. For 12 years we continued as a family and did our best to move on together in what had always seemed to me a haunted house that was now just a little shorter on love. There were hard times, especially for my mom, but it seemed we were slowly heading in the right direction. That was until my mother started whispering to herself when she thought no one was around. It started a couple of years ago. Initially, my dad and I thought nothing of it. When we caught her from time to time, she would brush it aside. "It's nice to talk to a rational person," on occasion she would chuckle. It honestly didn't seem like any reason to worry. Many people talk to themselves. Then one night I heard her whispering to herself from inside my mom's bedroom. I should mention that my dad and her had been sleeping in separate bedrooms for a while at that point. I'm not a person to intrude on other people's personal space. But I heard her whisper my name. It got my attention. So, there I stood, in the dark upstairs hallway of my parents' house, spying on my mother. I know it might sound weird, but here's the thing. She had been acting strangely for a while now. Distant. Almost a bit hostile toward me, and I had no idea why. We were never any good at actually talking to each other. The less said, the better could have been the family motto. This felt like an opportunity one had to jump at. She spoke in a low, muffled, and angry whisper. It was extremely hard to hear anything, but here's the gist of what I got. "Simon, my name, blank isn't blank Hole, blank leave blank was blank evil blank fault." Suddenly her voice rose above a whisper into a loud command, "Go away." I nearly jumped backward. Then I heard footsteps approaching the door and retreated down the stairs as quickly as I could. I paused at the bottom of the stairs in the main hallway and looked up. I heard my mom open the bedroom door and step out. Had she heard me? Then I saw her face peeking over the stair railing as I looked up. Backlit by the upstairs light, her expression seemed dark and inhuman. If you've ever tried staring at your reflection in the mirror in a darkly lit room, squinting slightly, you'll know what I mean. Features start to change. I stood there, frozen for what seemed like several minutes. I was sure she couldn't see me in the darkness downstairs. I was crouched, hiding, yet it seemed like her eyes were staring straight into mine. I remained motionless, afraid to move, afraid she would notice me. Finally, she retreated into the bedroom. I didn't sleep much that night. All I could think about was the few words I had heard. Why had she been whispering angrily to herself about me and Hole? Who was evil? I wanted to confront her, but how could I? I would have to admit to spying on her. I had to know more, and seeing no other option, I decided to keep spying on her. The only problem was, I couldn't hear her properly from outside the bedroom with the door closed. I needed to be in there. The following nights I would hide in my mom's bedroom, under her bed. It felt wrong. It really did, but I had to know what she was thinking. Confronting her, as I said, was absolutely not an option for several reasons. On the fourth night, it happened. I was lying trapped really, under the bed when the low, angry, and growling whisper began filling the room. "I'm the only one who cares. The only one who ever cared." The whisper crept into the room and seemed to speak from the walls. "They all forgot. They never mention you. I didn't know until then how terrifying and angry a person can sound while whispering. I couldn't believe this sound came from my mom. Simon did this, there was always something wrong with him. Always something wrong with that kid. I felt an intense fear and unease mixed with sadness. Was this what my mother had always thought of me? I tried to keep myself composed. I couldn't have her discover me now, creeping under the bed. Then she'd think something was wrong with me. It became nearly impossible for me when a second whisper, which I knew wasn't my mom, suddenly appeared. The pitch sounded inhuman, yet familiar. To my horror, I realized what made it familiar. Somewhere in that angry, resentful pitch were traces of Hull's voice. Something must be done about him. He must be punished. I covered my mouth and started sobbing. I couldn't help it. I hoped my mom couldn't hear it. Hearing Hull's voice again speaking those words. I never really believed in ghosts, demons, or any of the things my grandma seemed to believe in, yet how could I explain this? There was no explanation. I'll make sure he suffers for what he did, Hull, I'll make damn sure. My mom was whispering to my dead sister, and they both seemed to hate me for some reason that completely escaped me. I know I probably wasn't always the best brother, or the best son. Heck, there are a lot of things about me I don't like, but did I deserve their hatred? Their anger? Maybe I did. Suddenly the whispering stopped. I could hear my mom moving about the room. Had she heard my sobbing? For what seemed like agonizing hours I held my breath until the light was turned on and my mom went to bed. I waited until I was sure she was asleep and crept out from under the bed. As quietly as possible, I opened the door, but just as I was about to close it behind me, I heard my mom, "Simon, is that you?" I was caught. I slowly turned around. She was sitting up in the bed, bathed in darkness. I could barely see her expression, yet it seemed to be judging me. "I'm sorry, Mom," I had no words. Nothing to explain why I was suddenly standing there. "Is everything okay?" I shifted back and forth on my feet nervously. "Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disturb you." "It's nothing, we can talk about it tomorrow." Brilliant, then I had time to come up with an excuse. Hopefully, she hadn't seen me crawl out from under her bed. "It's late, Simon, you should get some sleep." I nodded. "Good night, Mom." I closed the door and instantly felt a panic attack coming on. Like the fabric of my soul was being torn into. I didn't get any sleep that night. I found out what my mom whispers to herself about when she thinks no one is listening, Part 2. The following morning was awkward, to say the least. My mom casually asked why I had been in her bedroom the night before, and all I could muster up was, "I wanted to ask you if I could borrow the car today." She sighed. I sensed she didn't believe me. "Sure, honey. Just don't take too long. I need it by tonight." I nodded silently. My mom then said, without looking up from her book, "Are you sure there's nothing else you want to talk about? You know you can always talk to me, right?" Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a sharpness that felt misplaced. Her gaze lingered a second too long, making my skin crawl. My dad took notice of the tension and shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "No, Mom, really. I just needed to borrow the car." She finally looked up and held my gaze for an excruciatingly long time before she spoke. "You know, you've been acting strangely." I almost choked on my coffee. I've been acting strangely. I felt a strong urge to confront her about everything I'd heard. About the whispers. All of it. But then I realized how insane it would have sounded, my dead sister and mom whispering to each other. My dad would take her side, surely. They might even have committed me. Was that her? Their goal? I felt like a moth pinned to a board under her stare, squirming under the weight of her unspoken accusations. "I've been stressed lately," I said finally. "I still have trouble finding a job. It wears me out a little." Her face was unreadable, but it felt like she was smirking behind her neutral gaze. "Sure, I understand, but please don't feel like a failure. Everyone falls on hard times." I got up and left. I never said I felt like a failure. I heard her sigh as I left the uncomfortable conversation behind. I couldn't risk spying on her again, but I couldn't just wait for whatever horrifying plan they had in store for me. Whatever punishment they felt I deserved, At that point, I remembered my grandma's warnings. I remembered how my mother had cut her off. Written her off as a superstitious oddball, considering everything. It now seemed I might do well listening to her for once. I had already gotten permission to borrow the car, so I decided to go see her. Grandma lived on the other side of town in a parcel house. Her front yard was overgrown with weeds. Clearly, she had gotten too old to tend to it herself. I felt bad. It was my mom's decision to cut her off, yet the rest of us followed her lead without much question. It had been years since I visited her. When I rang the bell, a sudden rush of nostalgia came over me as I heard the tune playing, "Oh, when the saints go marching in." I remembered then, despite her oddities, how much I had enjoyed spending time with her before Hole died. She invited me in with a smile on her face. If she was angry with me for not visiting more, it didn't show. The state of her house was in similar condition as her front yard, a mess. Boxes, trinkets, old souvenirs, and religious and occult objects flooded the place. The air inside was heavy, tinged with the faint metallic scent of old coins and something sour that I couldn't place. Shadows seemed to pool in the corners of the room, too deep for the weak light to penetrate. I suddenly felt watched from the dark corners. I sat, not knowing what to say, but it seemed she knew better than me. "You look tired, dear." I sighed and mustered up the energy to ask, "You once said this family had a history of tragedy. Like some kind of curse." She nodded. "Your mom and I never saw eye to eye on that." She wouldn't hear it. I suppose she thought I was a superstitious old hag. She chuckled, but her eyes betrayed her. "Maybe I am. But we are who we are." I looked around at the strange symbols and objects that hung on her walls. "Can you tell me about it?" Her eyes lit up as if she'd been waiting for someone to ask her, yet she seemed worried too. "Simon, dear, is something wrong?" I paused. "I think I'm cursed." She looked at me, and suddenly her expression changed into one of deep concern. "It's found you, hasn't it?" she whispered, almost as if the words themselves could summon something from the shadows. I swear it felt like the whispers were now inside my head, echoing and bouncing off the walls of my skull. "You're not getting away. You're not getting away. She can't help you." They grew louder, overlapping and swirling together until they became a cacophony of taunts. Words I couldn't fully grasp burrowed into my mind like claws. I did my best to ignore it. "What is it?" Grandma sighed. "Something as old as time, I suppose. Causing rifts between people, breaking you down slowly. It wants to be you. Wants you to think it's you." I felt unease in my entire body. "I don't understand." She placed a hand on my shoulder. "It took your uncle. Before that, it took your grandfather. Even before that. Accidents, deaths, tragedy." I felt more confused than ever. Didn't my uncle take his own life? Grandma interrupted, "It made him do it. It whispered in his ears. That's what it does, you know. It whispers when it doesn't scream." "Your uncle didn't just take his own life," Grandma said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He was hollowed out. Like something had scooped out his will and left him an empty shell." I had come looking for answers, but I was left more confused than ever. Why does it use my sister's voice? I don't understand. Grandma sighed. "Only you know the answer to that. I can't help you fight it. I can't take you on this journey. I can only show you the door. It knows you, and it will use that against you. It knows your fears. Your insecurities. It will take everything you love and turn it into something ugly. Tell you that you are to blame for this. Once you're weak enough, it will come for you, come to finish you off." She got up and started going through some old stuff. She found what looked like a wooden trinket, a circle with strange markings on it. She handed me the carved circle, its surface covered in strange markings. "Wear this," she said, her voice trembling. "But remember, this can't save you. Only you can do that." I was floored. How do you fight something like that? She took my hand. "You know. Look into yourself, and you'll know." Her touch brought me back in time. Hole was there. We were playing hide and seek in Grandma's house. It was just before Christmas, and the smell of cinnamon was everywhere. I had searched for Hole for what felt like hours. Suddenly, I heard a wailing. I followed the sound until I found her in the playhouse out in Grandma's backyard. She had accidentally locked herself inside. You didn't find me. I thought you'd left me. I thought, and just like that, I was back in the room with Grandma. I felt tears welling up. I can't do this alone. Ever since Hole died, things have. Mom hates me. Dad doesn't even care enough to hate me. I know it. Grandma shook her head. You can, and you will. You're not alone, but this one thing, you must do alone. You must look into yourself as you confront it. Reject its truth and find your own. I was on the verge of giving up. I don't know how to do that. She gently grabbed my shoulder. You've forgotten so much, haven't you? I can't help you see it, but maybe I can show you the way. Look in your parents' attic. There's a yellow, faded box up there. Find it. Maybe it will help you remember. Help you see what you need to see. I felt defeated. Hopeless, yet determined to keep fighting. As I got up, I stopped for a moment. Grandma? What really happened between you and Mom? Why don't you talk? She looked at me. Her eyes were old and tired. Things were said. We both said things we shouldn't have said. Your mom and I were very different, dear. People handle tragedy differently. I nodded and headed for the door. Simon, dear? I stopped. Remember what I said. My mom whispers to herself at night when she thinks no one is listening. Part 3. When I arrived back at my parents' house, the sun was still high. It was afternoon, and I knew they wouldn't be home for at least a couple of hours. I had time. My grandma had wanted me to find something in the attic. She'd been cryptic, as always, but the weight of her words stayed with me. Maybe it will help you remember. Help you see what you need to see. I found the wooden ladder tucked neatly in the closet, just where it had always been. The hatch to the attic groaned as I pulled it down, the sound carrying through the empty house. As I climbed, each step felt heavier than the last. I tried to brace myself for what I might find. The attic was unchanged. The same as I remembered from years ago, dusty. Old, and shrouded in an eerie stillness that seemed to press against my chest. The wooden beams overhead cast long shadows in the dim light filtering through the lone window. The floorboards creaked beneath my weight, sounding fragile, as if they might give way at any moment. The air was thick with the scent of rotten dust, a stale, suffocating aroma that crawled into my throat and refused to leave. Look for a yellow faded box, Grandma had said. I scanned the cluttered space and spotted a pile of boxes beneath a tattered blanket. The fabric was rough and grimy, like it had been abandoned to time. My hands brushed over the familiar texture as I peeled it back, and there it was, a large, faded yellow box. Scribbled on the side were the names Simon and Holly. My stomach sank. With trembling hands, I lifted the lid. The stale scent of old cardboard hit me immediately, and for a moment, I hesitated, half expecting something terrible to leap out at me. But all that greeted me were toys, faded drawings, and an old photo album. My chest loosened in relief, but the unease lingered. I sifted through the contents, each item dragging me back through memories and feelings I thought I had buried long ago. There was Leo, Hole's favorite stuffed white tiger. She'd adored him, carrying him everywhere. I'd been jealous once, just once, and because of me, Leo now wore an eye patch that my mom had lovingly sewn. The white fur was matted and gray with age, the little patch still crooked. Holding it now, I felt the sting of guilt I hadn't known I'd carried. It wasn't just a toy. It had been her joy, and I'd scarred it. Was I like that? Did I have trouble controlling my emotions? Did I take it out on Hole? I was a kid, I whispered aloud, trying to rationalize it. But the thought turned sour. No excuse. Something shifted in the air, a barely perceptible sound, like whispers carried by the attic's stale breath. No excuse. The words coiled around me, soft at first, then louder, crashing in a rising crescendo. I shook my head, desperate to quiet them. I hummed a tune I barely remembered, a childhood melody that brought me a sliver of comfort. Beneath the toys were drawings, mine, mostly. Memories of afternoons spent with crayons and markers came flooding back. Hadn't I also drawn things for Hole? I had, I remember now. Draw me tigers, rainbows, and sunflowers, she'd say with wide eyes. And I'd oblige, for Hole, the words on the drawing said, surrounded by little hearts. The ones with tigers, rainbows, and sunflowers. They were happy, innocent pieces. Tigers played under rainbows, sunflowers stretched tall under bright skies. But not all the drawings were like that. The others, the ones I'd made just for me, were different. I flipped through them, the familiar unease returning. My mom's voice echoed in my mind, "So many of your drawings have ghosts in them." She wasn't wrong. I hadn't noticed it as a child, but now, staring at the crude figures, I couldn't deny it. One drawing caught my eye, a family portrait. Stick figures, all of us together. Except I'd drawn myself twice. One version of me stood with the others, smiling. The second. It was scrawled in red, thick and angry, overlapping lines that slashed across the page like open wounds. The whispers came again, closer this time. Always broken. Always broken. I dropped the drawing, my hands trembling. What had Grandma wanted me to see? What had she hoped I'd remember? The ghosts in the drawings weren't just stick figures, they were hollow-eyed, monstrous things. Their smiles stretched too wide. Jagged mouths curling unnaturally across their faces. Why had I drawn these things? I flipped to another drawing, a grotesque scene of a monster killing a man. Below it, in a child's scrawl, I had written, "It's fun to murder." I shook my head, trying to dismiss it. Just a kid with a vivid imagination. It didn't mean anything, right? I'd probably been inspired by that old horror movie with the murderous doll, Child's Play, I think it was called, but the whispers disagreed. "You lie to yourself," they hissed. Their voices wrapped around me, overlapping in a maddening chorus that rose from every shadow in the attic. You were always broken. Dark and twisted. Poor Hole. She suffered because of you. No! I screamed, clamping my hands over my ears. I started humming the tune Hole and I used to sing together, trying to drown out the voices. But it didn't help. They weren't coming from the attic, they were inside my head. This can't be what Grandma wanted me to see. Did she set me up? Was she in on it all? Keep going, a voice commanded, louder and sharper than the rest. It cut through the noise like a knife. I obeyed. I opened the photo album, flipping through the pages of old, faded Polaroids bleached by time. There we were, Hole and me, side by side in nearly every photo. I hadn't looked at these in years. As if seeing her face would bring back something I'd rather leave behind. She smiled at me now, from the old, faded Polaroid. One of the last taken of her and me before she died. Forever 8 years old. Sitting next to me in our parents' old storage space, where we kept all the Christmas decorations. Where we used to play, her expression haunted me. Something about the way she sat, slightly too far away from me, as if something had spooked her. The whispers grew louder, their words like daggers. Yes, yes, yes. She was scared of you. Scared of you. No. I yelled, my voice shaking as almost slammed the album shut, but then my eyes caught another picture. It was of me and Hole in the garden, standing beneath 2 towering sunflowers. Our smiling faces beamed with innocent, unrestrained joy. Draw me tall sunflowers, her small voice echoed in my head, faint and almost drowned by the whispers. My mom once told me the world, everything and everyone in it, seems larger, more mysterious, and adventurous to a child. Everything is new and exciting. Everything must be explored. A child will see entire universes in a simple leaf. We forget, though, most of us, what it's like to have that kind of imagination. I remembered how we used to play in that garden. To us, it was a jungle. Flowers, weeds, and trees became magical kingdoms. We were adventurers, explorers, greeting every animal and insect like old friends, and looking up at the sunflowers who seemed to reach into the sky. I remembered the first time Hole saw a rainbow. We were lying on the grass, rain lightly falling around us. Her eyes lit up with wonder. What is that pretty thing in the sky? She asked. It's a rainbow, Hole, I told her. She dragged me around the rest of the day trying to chase it down. Our backyard was a jungle. Our jungle. Flowers, weeds, large trees, and bushes were everywhere. On lazy summer days, we would play this game, where we'd pretend one of us was a big hungry tiger chasing the other one through the garden. I remember running through the bushes, with leaves and branches hitting my face, my heart racing with pure excitement and joy as I heard Hole closing in behind me. She'd growl like a tiger, and we would both finally collapse in a fit of giggles when she eventually caught me. After she died, the garden changed. It looked the same but felt different, empty of something essential, occupied by something monstrous. Once it had been a jungle of wonder, a kaleidoscope of greens, yellows, reds, and purple bursting with life. Now, the leaves seemed dull, their edges curling inward like clawed hands. The sunflowers loomed less like gentle giants and more like towering sentinels, guarding something sinister. I remembered the last time I ran through that garden. I was 14, desperate to feel like I had back when Hole was alive. I ran through the weeds and bushes, pretending she was chasing me like she used to. I remember running through the weeds and bushes like I had done so many times before, my heart racing with excitement. Then I heard it, branches crackling behind me, bushes being trampled. The laughter coupled with growling. Her laughter. Her growling, only it wasn't, it sounded wrong, like a deliberately bad imitation, a wailing, painful laughter devoid of joy or innocence. An angry, guttural growl. I stopped and glanced over my shoulder, and that's when I saw her. Pale, ghostly, slightly obscured through the weeds and bushes. Her eyes, those dead, accusing eyes, stared straight at me. Eyes that had closed forever and been buried years ago. I froze, paralyzed by fear, as she slowly crept out from the shadows. She crawled on all fours like she used to, pretending to be a tiger. Only this time, her movements were predatory, deliberate, menacing. Her limbs, broken and twisted as they had been the day she died, jerked unnaturally with every step, like a marionette controlled by unseen strings. The growling deepened, layered with something that didn't belong to her small frame. Her face, once so full of life, was now pale and contorted with hatred. The light that had danced in her eyes during our childhood adventures was gone, replaced by an empty, seething darkness. Her lips twisted into a wicked, unnatural smile that stretched far too wide, splitting her pale face like a gash. Jagged, yellowed teeth, too many to count, filled a mouth that seemed to grow larger the longer I stared. Her bright blue eyes turned to black pits, glinting with an otherworldly hate that seemed to pierce my very soul. Don't you want to play anymore? Her voice was guttural, a hideous growl that rumbled from deep inside her throat. I turned and ran. I ran like I'd never run before. My chest burned, my heart pounded, but I didn't dare stop. There would be no giggling or collapsing in fits of laughter this time. If she caught me, I knew it wouldn't end with joy. Behind me, I heard her half wailing, half growling, a rising crescendo of fury. Her voice rang out, a guttural howl that sent shivers down my spine. It's your fault. It's all your fault. And now you leave me. Her words tore through the air, sharp and ragged, like 1,000 nails scraping against bone. The sound vibrated in my skull, drilling into my thoughts. Branches whipped at my face, cutting my skin as I ran. The air around me felt thick and heavy, carrying the acrid scent of decay. My lungs burned as I gasped for breath, pushing my legs harder than I ever thought possible. The crackling of branches behind me grew louder. Her howling was closer now, and I was certain she'd catch me. I screamed, the sound ripping from my throat, raw and desperate. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a voice calling out, a lifeline. I burst out of the bushes and into the open. Strong arms wrapped around me, and I thrashed wildly, convinced she'd caught me. It wasn't until I felt the familiar warmth of my mother's embrace that I realized I was safe. I buried my face in her chest, sobbing uncontrollably. She held me tightly, rubbing my back in silent comfort. What happened? She asked softly, but I couldn't possibly begin to explain. No more words were said about it. We were never good at talking in my family. As I glanced back, tears blurring my vision, I saw her, half hidden in the bushes. Her pale, ghoulish face stared at me with those empty, hateful eyes. That smile, God, that smile, was still there, carved into her face like a cruel scar. Had she always been there? Watching me through the years, through my lonely, siblingless childhood? Always one step behind, waiting for the right moment to strike? No. This wasn't her. It couldn't be. This was something else. Something monstrous. This was the it Grandma had warned me about. How could I fight something when I didn't even know what it was? What it wanted. I know I wasn't the best brother. I know I've screwed up then and now. I could never be like her. Perfect Holly. I wasn't there for her when she needed me most. Maybe I was even partly to blame for what happened to her. For when she fell. Is that what it wanted me to admit? Would that bring me peace? I couldn't tell where the whispers ended and my own thoughts began. They echoed in my mind, relentless and accusing. I took the Polaroid of Hole, me and the sunflowers. I took the drawings I'd made for her, too. I held on to the memories of running through the bushes, of laughter, of childhood wonder. Of tigers, rainbows, and sunflowers. I don't know what's coming, but I need those memories. I need them close.
Until next time, subscribe to stay up to date with all updates. No screamers or shocking moments, only comfort and safety. Bye.